So calm to the water now, I think we can swim.
What's up YouTube? Welcome back. This is part 2 of our mix breakdown video for the single Faith in Gold by I Need Mana. Today we're talking about bass, electric guitars, and keyboards.
Despite the rust, amidst the chaos, the ashes and
For the bass and electric guitars, Clayton would have recorded these DI'd into his system, but he sent me 2 tracks treated as if they are a bass DI and a bass amp track. I think he processed the quote-unquote bass amp track through some Easy Mix plugins, but he's treated them in such a way that one of the tracks is mostly low end and low mids, and the other track is mostly high mids, high end, and some distortion and growl. So here's the sound of the track that is mostly focused on the low end. And here's the sound of the track that's mostly focused on the high end. So the first thing I do when presented with 2 tracks like this, focusing on the low end and the high end separately, is I make sure to find a good blend between them. And once I have that blend, I'll start treating each of the tracks separately. So here's the blend I came up with these 2 tracks. So we've got a healthy amount of that low end, a good amount of the high end with that dirt in there. It's sounding great. So let's play that back with the drum tracks that we looked at in my previous video. One of the most important challenges when mixing rock music is making sure that the drums and bass can both have their own area of the low end without clashing together. So on that low bass track, I've added a Renaissance EQ. I'm not doing very much on it. I've just got a high pass filter around 55 to clear up some of that low end for the kick drum to live. And I've got a high shelf at about 3K, just to make sure that the high bass track has some more room to play with this track. So here's just that low bass track with no EQ on it. And here it is with EQ. So you can see that I've focused that low end a little bit more. It doesn't have a whole bunch of that sub bass, super low end sound, and that's going to play a lot better with the kick drum. So on the higher bass track, I've also added a Renaissance EQ. Now on this one, in a similar fashion to the previous one, I've added a low shelf around 123 Hz, just to help that low bass track sit in there a little more nicely. I've also added a small boost around 1.3K, and because the high end ended up becoming a little bit too much, I've added a 2.5 decibel shelving cut at 6.1K. So here's that high bass track again with no EQ. And with EQ. And with the other bass track. That just helped to focus each of those 2 tracks onto the most important elements of them. So let's play that again with the drum tracks. So once I had those bass tracks sorted out, I sent them to a bus. Now I did this because I wanted to be able to compress those 2 tracks as if they were one. So the first plugin I have on my bass bus is a CLA3A optical compressor. I like using optical compressors on bass because they tend to warm up and fatten up the bass sound the more you push them. And I like this LA3A because it has a nice saturation to it. So when you push the bass in there a fair amount, it starts to break up and get a little bit dirty. So I've got this compressor set to take off about 2 decibels overall. And it's a pretty simple interface. There's no attack and release settings or anything, so there's not much to explain there. Here's the sound of just the bass with no compression on it. And with the compression. So you can hear that squashes it a little bit, adds a little bit of grit, and just really fattens the whole thing out. But optical compressors are notoriously slow. So when it comes to bass, a lot of those picked sounds or plucked sounds end up passing through before the compressor really starts affecting it. So because of that, I like to add a much quicker compressor directly after the optical compressor. In this case, I've chosen the Waves Renaissance compressor. So this one in particular, I've got at a ratio of 2, an attack time of 1.2 milliseconds, a release of 56.1 milliseconds, and it's set to provide about 2 to 2.5 decibels of gain reduction. So here's the bass folder without the Renaissance compressor on it. And with the Renaissance compressor. So that just helps to really grab those quick transients and hold everything at a nice even level. So what do we have so far? We've got some EQ cuts before the compressor. We've got 2 compressors on there, keeping it nice and even. At this point, I like to start boosting some EQs. So next in my chain, I brought in some hardware. I've got my Warm Audio WA73 over here, and I've sent the bass track to that after these compressors. So what we have over here is a sizable shelving boost on the low end at 110 Hz to give the bass that extra low end boost that it needs. We've got another medium-ish boost at 360 Hz, just to add some more of that low mid-range honky growl sort of thing. And then we've got a high shelving boost at 10K to bring in a little bit more of that aggressive metallic-y kind of sound through the bass that I just love hearing in metal bass. So here's the bass track without my analog EQ. And with it. The last plugin I have on my bass channel is another Renaissance EQ. This one's just got a few boosts and cuts here and there. I'm assuming I put this on later on in the mix as everything else started piling in, just to make space for one thing or the other. I've got a 1.5 decibel boost at 100 Hz. I've got a 3 decibel cut at about 375 Hz, and a 2 decibel cut at 1.6K. So here's how my bass sounded before any processing. With everything. Now let's take a look at everything we have so far, the drums and the processed bass. Now we've got a lot of guitar layers on here, but not a heck of a lot going on each of these layers. So we'll start with the main chugging guitars. These guitar parts are double tracked, meaning Clayton got the right performance, doubled that performance, and we're using both of those takes, panned hard left and hard right. So here's how the two of those sound together. So starting with the right channel, because there's less going on that one, I've just got a Renaissance EQ by Waves. So I've got a high pass filter at 150 Hz to take off some of that boomy low end when he starts chugging. I've got a low pass filter at about 9.4K to take off just a little bit of that high end sizzle from all the dirt that he has going on. And then I've got an almost 4 decibel boost at 450 Hz. Just to give it a little bit more thickness in that low mid-range. So here's how just that guitar sounds with no EQ. And with EQ. So that really just focuses up that sound a little bit and cleans up the high and low end. For the left-hand channel, I've got almost the same EQ going on. Renaissance EQ with a high-pass filter at 126 Hz and a low-pass filter at 8.5K. There's no boost in the mid-range on this one. Because after that, I've added an API 550B EQ. So this one's adding a little bit of character. I think I decided to use this one to further separate the tone between the two of these guitars. Clayton would have recorded them both through his bulb overdrive pedal, probably through the same guitar, a lot of the same settings. So they sounded a little too similar and weren't really giving the effect of, the big doubled guitar sound that we were looking for. So on this API plugin, I've got a 4 decibel boost at 500 Hz and a 4 decibel boost at 5K. The 500 Hz boost is to give it a little more of that throaty mid-range. The 5K is to give it a little bit more sizzle. So here's how this guitar sounds with just the Renaissance EQ on it. And with the API. So it kind of just fattens it up a little bit and sharpens it a little bit more. So after the API EQ, I threw on an instance of Waves H-Comp. It's at about a 2.5 ratio, a medium slow attack time. The punch knob is turned up a little bit past half. And I believe the release is tempo synced, which is a really neat feature of this plugin. And I've got the threshold set for about 1 decibel of gain reduction just on the heavier parts. So here's the sound of that guitar track without the compressor on it. And with the compressor. That helps to fatten it out a little bit and keep everything just a little bit more in check. So here's the sound of the two guitars together. So after that, I sent these two guitars to a bus and compressed them with the CLA76 plugin. I generally turn to the 1176 plugins for guitars just because it's such a versatile compressor, and I find the way that it squishes guitars always kind of helps glue them together in a mix. So for this instance, I've got it at a ratio of 8. I've got a medium slow attack time and a medium quick release time. The purpose of which is to help hold the overall level, squish everything down a little bit, but not take away any of that sharp pick attack. And I do have this fairly slammed. I believe it's taking off between 7 and 10 decibels on average. So here's the sound of that bus without the compressor. And with the compressor. After my compressor there, I've got two instances of the Renaissance EQ. Both of them are doing very minor tweaks, and if I remember correctly, these were put there for a similar reason as the Renaissance EQ on the end of my bass chain. Once I had everything stacked together, there were just little frequencies here and there that needed slight addressing, and so I popped a few of these on to give it just little tweaks. I've got a 3 decibel cut at 113 Hertz, and I've got a 2 decibel boost at 526 Hertz, and that's about all they're doing. Oh, and a small 0.9 decibel boost at 3.2K. So here's the sound of those guitars before any processing. And with processing. So another thing I did with that track is just a little bit of automation on it. I kind of felt that the chugging section, the palm muted section, was overpowering the other part. So on the slide riff at the beginning of it, I boosted it up. I boosted up the whole channel about half a decibel. Not very much, just enough to make sure it stood out. So the next guitar channel we have on here is labeled as Riff Light. This is the more melodic riff that goes through the verse of the song, and it carries on through the chorus as well. Clayton double tracked these ones as well, but with a high octave and a low octave track, which we also panned left and right. So here's the sound of those with no processing on them. So on each of those tracks, I've got a Renaissance compressor. They're both set at a very light ratio, under 2:1, and set to take off maybe between 1 and 3 decibels at the hardest part. Just a little bit of light compression to keep them in check before I sent them to a bus, so that when I put a compressor on the bus, neither channel would be triggering the compressor before the other. So here's how they sound with no compression on them. And with compression on them. So again, very light compression, more of a utility thing than anything. So the first plugin on the bus for those channels that I have is my CLA2A optical compressor. In a similar fashion to the CLA3A that I've mentioned before, this one tends to really warm up a signal the more you push it. However, this one doesn't break up nearly as much. So I like to use this one for cleaner sound sources, such as light guitars, bass in a less heavy mix, or lead vocals, backup vocals. So I'm not pushing this very hard. It's still only set to have about 1 to maybe 2 decibels of gain reduction. I think just to keep these tracks nice and even. So here's the sound of these tracks without the compressor. And with the compressor. That really just, squishes them a little bit, keeps them nice and even. After that, I've got an instance of the Waves Kramer HLS channel. This is a pretty interesting plugin. It's modeled after the Helios console at, I believe, Olympic Studios. I like this EQ quite a bit, but a little bit goes a long way. The high end on it is especially nice, but the problem is that the boost knob is in steps of 4 decibels at a time. So oftentimes, even that first 4 decibel mark is a little bit too much. So here's the sound of that bus without the EQ on it. And with. That really just helps give that part a little bit of extra sparkle. So here's what we got so far with the guitars, the bass, and the drums. I really like the guitar solo in this song, and Clayton cracks me up because he'll be the first one to tell you that he's not that great of a guitar player, and then he'll put a solo in his song that sounds like this. So Clayton double-tracked this solo, and I panned them 15% left and right. I didn't do anything to the tracks themselves, but I did send them to the bus where I processed that. Here's the guitar solo on its own with no processing applied to it. So it sounds pretty good, but I thought it was a little bit thin and there was a little too much of the pick attack going on there. So the first thing I've put on the guitar solo bus is a Renaissance EQ. So I've put on a high pass filter around 112 just to clear up that super low end for the kick and the bass and all the stuff that lives down there. And I've added a 4.7 decibel boost around 240K to just fatten it up a little bit. There's another almost 2 decibel boost at 1.2K. Just to just to give it a little more mid-range presence, and a 2 decibel cut around 8.1K just to take down some of that that harsh pick attack in there. So here's that guitar solo with no EQ on it. And with the EQ. So you can hear it's just a little fatter, a little less harsh in that high end. After that, I added on a CLA3A optical compressor. I've got it set for between 3 and 5 decibels of gain reduction at the heaviest parts. So here's that guitar solo with no compression on it. And with compression. So again, I'm driving that compressor until it starts to break up, just adds that little bit of extra grit that I love so much on guitars. I've also set up an effects send for this guitar solo. We've got just a little bit of delay and a little bit of reverb on there. The delay plugin I've chosen is Waves H-Delay. I love this plugin because it's just so versatile and really easy to use. And it's got this lo-fi setting that I love so much. I think that lo-fi button really turns it from more of a clean, precise digital delay into more of a gritty tape delay kind of sound. So I've got that on there. The delay is at 375 milliseconds. The feedback is fairly quick. I think it has about 4 or 5 delays that all fade out nicely. And then we've got a bit of a high pass, bit of a low pass on there. High pass is at 126 hertz. The low pass is at 6.12K. And yeah, so here's the solo with no delay on there. And with delay. After the delay track, I've put a reverb on there. That's taken care of by Waves TrueVerb. So I tweaked that reverb track just until it blurred the lines of the delay we have. We've got kind of a medium-sized room reverb sound with early reflections are up, and I kept the direct signal up on this plugin just so we didn't completely lose the sound of that delay. So here's the guitar solo with the delay with no reverb. And with the reverb. So we've got some EQ, some compression, some delay, some reverb. Here's how that all sounds so far with the track. Lastly, on the guitar solo, I like to add a little bit of automation just to help it really flow a little better, add some life to it, and to keep it peaking above everything else. So if you check out my fader port there, there's not a heck of a lot of automation going on, but you'll see it twitch every now and again. There you go, just adding a little bit of excitement to that guitar solo. Now the guitar solo harmonies, Clayton has also doubled, and I've pounded them only slightly wider than the guitar solo. They're at 18 left and right. So I didn't do much to the tracks themselves, so I did send them to a bus that has a Renaissance EQ on it. So this Renaissance EQ has a high-pass filter at 119 Hertz, a 2.4 decibel boost at 455 Hertz, and a 2.5 decibel boost at 5.1 K. So here's the sound of the harmonies on their own with no EQ. And with the EQ. Just a little bit more of a focused sound, a little more precise. And I've also sent that harmony to the same effects send that I had the guitar solo sent to, with the H delay and the true verb. Here's how that sounds with the music. So there's 3 keyboard tracks in this song. They're all more background textural kind of things. The first one we'll look at is the one that does the least. In the breaks between the verses and choruses, and before the solo and everything, we've got this little piano sound. Clayton did some processing on his end to give it that kind of filtered sound, and then I've only added a simple instance of Re-EQ, Reaper's stock EQ. We've got a 2.7 decibel cut at 557 Hertz. We've got a 2 decibel boost at 7.3 K. So here's how that piano sounds without that. And here it is with the EQ. Just adds a little bit more attack to that piano sound. On the B section of that chorus, we've got a synth track that comes in, and that sounds like this on its own. I think at one point Clayton asked me to cut this synth track out of there, but I just layered it in really, really quietly, and it added a really nice texture to the song. So all I've got going on there is a Re-EQ. We've got a high pass filter at 117 Hertz, a low pass filter at 17 K. We've got a 5 decibel cut around 543 Hertz. And we've got a 6 decibel boost at 7.1 K, so some pretty aggressive EQing happening here. Now here's how that sounds without the EQ. And with the EQ. So you mix that really quietly into the background of everything. It just adds a nice kind of high-end shimmery sparkle to the back of the chorus. Here's how it sounds with the music. So that brings us to the piano track that goes through the entirety of the song. Firstly, we've got a Renaissance EQ on here. I've got a high pass filter on it around 111. We've got a very small, almost 2 decibel boost at about 279 Hertz, and a 4 decibel boost at 4.6 K. So here's how that piano track sounds on its own. And here's how it sounds with the Renaissance EQ. So it just adds a little more body and presence to that. Next, I've put on an instance of CLA 2A. I've got that set to take off anywhere from 2 to 5 decibels per note. Like I've said before, I like pushing these optical compressors because they seem to really warm up your signal when you do. So here's the sound of the piano with no compressor on it. And with a compressor. That helps to warm up the signal, and it also helps to bring forward the delay and reverb that Clayton put on the track before he sent it to me. After that processing on the piano, I sent it to an effects send. So what we've got happening here is Waves Super Tap 2. I had just gotten this plugin when I decided to put it on here. I think this was my test run for it, not really intending for it to stick around, but then I heard the way it sounded and fell in love with that sound. So I've got this effect coming in only in the choruses. Throughout the verse, this piano is more dry. So here's the sound of that delay. After that, I wanted to dull the delay up a little bit, so I've put another Renaissance EQ after the delay, and set a low-pass filter around 4.1K. So here's how that all sounds together. So here's how all those keys sound in context in the mix.
Stars lit like lanterns without the curtain. The feeling's electric ripples, oceans wide. Sing like sirens with no reason to rhyme. Shining brightly, burn from a spark. Light up this home we left in the dark. These dreams were built on faith and gold. The feelings of
Thank you so much for watching part 2 of my mix breakdown. In part 3, we'll be going over all the vocals and backup vocal tracks we have. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, hit that subscribe button down below, hit that notification bell to make sure you're getting notifications when I upload new videos. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you in the next one.
home we left in the dark. These dreams were built on faith.